Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to this virtual and in-person service of the Idaho Falls Unitarian Universalist Church on this 24th of November 2024. We know you come here for different reasons: to find community, to seek your spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to be nurtured, to explore new ideas, to find comfort, and perhaps to find the answers to some of your bigger questions. We know you come from different places, different religions, different beliefs, and different backgrounds. We hope that you will find comfort, connection, challenge, and love here. If you are watching online, please sign in to the chat box so that we may know who is attending, and you may let us know your joys and concerns. I am Ron Gold, and I will be assisting Reverend Carson in the service this morning. The tech person is Vic Allen, and Marty Carson will be doing the thing.
We'll see if he shows up.
Time for all ages, and Jessica will be virtual this morning. For announcements, please silence your cell phone if you haven't already done so. And please write your joys and concerns on a slip of paper back there with Judy. And we'll read those a little bit later. And next Sunday will be the Sunday that we will decorate the church for Christmas after the service. And are there any other announcements that should be made this morning?
The interfaith service this afternoon for the outside class. Just wanted to remind folks that this afternoon at 4 o'clock at the chapel of the Community Food Basket, there will be an interfaith Thanksgiving service. I'll be participating in that service, so all are welcome, and hope to see at least a few people show up for that. It'd be nice. Thanks.
It's time now for everyone to stand up and greet everyone.
Hi, darling. Good to see you. I do too.
How are you? I'm doing all right. How are you, man? Oh, stressed. Yeah. I wanted to reiterate if there's anything at all I can do. Okay. I'm not sure how much.
Right now, I'm just trying to survive and try to figure out what to do. I'm organizing an apartment down at U of U. Neurology department. Because I can't get in here.
Let us know if you need anything. I mean, my life is like yours. I'm trying to do things, but just let one of us know, me or who are the other people? Ron, so don't be shy. We're not.
Yeah, the thing is, right now, I have a lot of free time because yesterday she slept until 3 p.m. So it's just sometimes it's difficult to know when she's going to sleep or not. But in general, she's still aware enough, so I can go for a few hours. But if I need something, yesterday I was pretty well. She was in bad shape. She woke up at 3.
I'm sorry. That's got to be hard.
Yeah, it is. It is hard.
We're supposed to sit down. I don't know what your 12-year-old granddaughter can do. I mean, I'll talk to you after.
Okay.
I just.
And now, let us prepare ourselves for worship. Calm our hearts, our minds, our breathing. Breathe deeply in and out, listening to your breath as I ring the peaceful 3 times. church's covenant helps us remember why we are a part of this faith and why we give our time and our resources to this congregation. If you so choose, please recite along with me the covenant that this church has chosen to live by.
Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
We will now light the chalice. As we ignite this flame, may it represent the warmth of love, the clarity of wisdom, and that transformative power of community. Let it guide us on our journey of shared exploration and understanding.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Our call to worship this morning is the poem Trophic Cascade by Camille T. Dungy. And a note on the title, a trophic cascade is an ecological phenomenon caused by the addition or removal of a top predator, which causes a ripple effect throughout the layers of an ecosystem and even potentially changes the landscape itself. After the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone and, as anticipated, their culling of deer, trees grew beyond the deer stunt of the mid-century. In their upreach, songbirds nested who scattered seed for underbrush, and in that cover warmed snowshoe hare. Weasel and water shrew returned, also vole, and soon came hawk and falcon, bald eagle, kestrel, and with them hawk shadow, falcon shadow, eagle shade, and kestrel shade haunted newly buried runnels where deer no longer rummaged, cautious as they were now of being surprised by wolves. Berries brought bear, while undergrowth and willows, growing now right down to the river, brought beavers who dammed. Muskrats came to the dams, and tadpoles came to the night song of the fathers of tadpoles. With water striders, the dark gray American dipper bobbed in fresh pools of the river, and fish stayed, and the bear who fished also called deer fawns, and to their kills, scraps, came vulture and coyote, long gone in the region until now, and their scattered seed, and more trees, brush, and berries grew up along the river that had run straight and so flooded, but thus dammed, compelled to meander, less prone to overrun. Don't you tell me this is not the same as my story. All this life born from one hungry animal, this whole new landscape, the course of the river changed. I know this. I reintroduced myself to myself. This time, a mother, after which nothing was ever the same. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 38, Morning Has Broken.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rains do suddenly from heaven, like the first dew fall
Good morning.
Good morning.
Today I will share with you a tale from the Wabanaki culture, and it's about Bluskabi and the game animals. Now, long ago, Bluskabi decided he would do some hunting. He took his bow and arrows and went into the woods. But all the animals said to each other, aha, here comes Bluskabi, he's hunting us. Let us hide. So they hid, and Bluskabi could not find them. He was not pleased. He went home to the little lodge near the big water where he lived with Grandmother Woodchuck. Grandmother, he said, make a game bag for me. So Grandmother Woodchuck took some caribou hair and made him a game bag. She wove it together tight and strong, and it was a fine game bag. But when she gave it to Bluskabi, he looked at it and then threw it down. This is not good enough, he said. So then Grandmother Woodchuck took deer hair. She wove a larger and finer game bag and gave it to him. But Bluskabi looked at it and threw it down. This is not good enough, Grandmother, he said. Now, Grandmother Woodchuck took moose hair and wove him a very fine game bag indeed. It was large and strong, and she took porcupine quills, which she flattened with her teeth, and she wove a design into the game bag to make it even more attractive. But Bluskabi looked at this game bag too and threw it down. Grandmother, he said, this is not good enough. Bluskabi, said Grandmother Woodchuck, how can I please you? What kind of game bag do you want? Then Bluskabi smiled. Grandmother, he said, make one out of woodchuck hair. So Grandmother Woodchuck pulled all of the hair from her belly, and to this day you will see that all woodchucks still have no hair there. Then she wove it into a game bag. Now, this game bag was magical. No matter how much you put into it, there would still be room for more. And Bluskabi took this game bag and smiled. Grandmother, I thank you. Now Bluskabi went back into the woods and walked until he came to a large clearing. And then he called out as loudly as he could, hey, all you animals, listen to me. A terrible thing is going to happen. The sun is going to go out. The world is going to end, and everything is going to be destroyed. Well, when the animals heard that, they became frightened. They came to the clearing where Bluskabi stood with his magic game bag. Bluskabi, they said, what can we do? The world is going to be destroyed. How can we survive? Bluskabi smiled. My friends, he said, just climb into my game bag. Then you will be safe in there when the world is destroyed. So all of the animals went into his game bag. The rabbits and the squirrels went in, and the game bag stretched to hold them. The raccoons and foxes went in, and the game bag stretched larger still. The deer went in, and the caribou went in. The bears went in, and the moose went in, and the game bag stretched to hold them all. Soon, all of the animals in the world were in Bluskabi's game bag. Then Bluskabi tied the top of the game bag, laughed, slung it over his shoulder, and headed home. Grandmother, he said, now we no longer have to go out and walk around looking for food. Whenever we want anything, we can just reach into my game bag. Bluskabi, she said, why must you always do things this way? You cannot keep all of the game animals in a bag. They will sicken and die. There will be none left for our children and our children's children. It is also right that it should be difficult to hunt them. Then you will grow stronger, trying to avoid being caught. Then things will be in the right balance. Come, grandmother, said Gustavi. That is so. So he picked up his game bag and went back to the clearing, and he opened it up. Hey, all you animals, he called. You can come out now. Everything is all right. The world was destroyed, but I put it back together again. And then all of the animals came out of the magic game bag. They went back into the woods, and they are still there today because Gustavi heard what his grandmother Woodchuck had to say. And we will now proceed to our joys and concerns.
We'll light a candle for each of the joys and concerns. First one is from Victoria. A joy. The Idaho Falls Symphony last night was incredible as always. A brand new piece had its premiere performance, and the composer was actually there. That was very exciting. Another one from Victoria, a joy. Thanks to the people who signed volunteer lists last week. Good. Another one from Victoria, a concern. Cindy and Rob Logan are home sick with daycare crud from the grandkids. Get well soon. And from Judy, I am so sad about America. I am two things. I am amazed by great folks and good news. Thank you. Are there any joys or concerns? No. We will light one additional candle for those joys and concerns that we hold in our hearts.
Our reading this morning is from the book Faith in Nature, Environmentalism as Religious Quest by Thomas R. Dunlap. Wilderness, like nature, has many contradictory meanings, and Americans have used them all and added a few of their own. The European settlers arrived with biblical ideas of wilderness as exile and the devil's haunts, the place where God met and led the people of Israel. The prophets took refuge from their enemies, and Christ prepared for his ministry. And with European ones, of wild lands as the haunts of wild beasts and wild men, and they looked in the wild America for fabulous kingdoms and unknown animals. After independence, they came to see the land as an endless storehouse where all could prosper. By the end of the 19th century, they believed that the encounter with wilderness had shaped the national character. They also found in wilderness, following John Muir, the doorway to reality and a refuge from society. The generations that followed fixed on landscapes without visible evidence of industrial society as the place for a spiritual journey. Here, where the veil between human society and the world's realities thinned, those who abandoned modern technology and immersed themselves in the land could come to an emotional understanding of the intellectual truths of our ties to nature. Wilderness became a key conservation cause by the 1960s, and a decade later, a geographer described it as a contemporary form of sacred place, valued as a symbol of geopiety and focus for religious feeling. While Americans embraced nature in various forms from the first days of settlement and gave wilderness many meanings, they never gave it a permanent place. It was raw material for civilization, land that should be turned into farms and pastures as quickly as possible. And even when they did set areas of land aside for their natural qualities, they did not include wilderness. The national parks preserved monumental scenery and geological wonders that visitors could view in comfort, not primeval landscapes. Only in the 1920s, as roads and lodges approached the last large roadless areas in the continental United States, did a few people ask if wild land could have or should have a place in industrial civilization. An offering to support the mission of this church will now be given and gratefully received.
Do you want me to help you or something?
A few days ago, something came across one of the Facebook groups I follow, written by a wildlife photographer listed only as Michael. It was a short lament in honor of the famous Grizzly 399, the queen of the Tetons, who was struck by a car and killed in the Snake River Canyon near Jackson Hole on October 22nd at the remarkable age of 28. In it, the author wrote, "They called it paradise, the place to be, a mountain realm like no other, a place where the spectacular Teton Range rises 6,000 feet above the valley floor, offering one of the most distinct and dramatic mountain fronts in the world. Below the striking peaks, the mighty Snake River meanders through a sagebrush valley dotted with aspen and pine. And it is here that I once met a great grizzly bear. She was known as Grizzly 399. Because I saw what was happening, could feel what was happening, I wanted to give the great bear space. I didn't want to be chasing her around the park, waiting in my car with heated leather seats, hoping she'd cross the road, all the while hemming her in. I knew what was happening. Full-size commercial jets were flying overhead, landing at an international airport that should never even be there, dropping off passengers to a growing town that wasn't meant to be there, driving to stores that should have never been built there. For 28 years, Grizzly 399's world shrunk all around her. Slowly, year by year, she had to make adjustments to the sprawl and greed of Jackson Hole, to the sprawl and greed of the human race. The post went on for a bit longer, but you can get the gist of the author's lament for the death of this special creature, who was probably the most famous wild bear in history. She was certainly an ambassador for her species to visitors of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. This heartfelt lament was a recognition that wild animals need wild places to survive. And this is especially true for large predators like grizzly bears, who often roam for miles throughout a large range in search of food. And of course, the wild places, the regions of the world that we call wilderness, are rapidly shrinking as the human population grows and civilization continues to sprawl. For now, at least, we are lucky here in Idaho to be surrounded by millions of acres of land that can commonly be regarded as wilderness, though many areas do not meet the legal definition for federal designation. You can take a short drive in almost any direction and find yourself in a vast sagebrush, scrub desert, or forested land, populated by elk, pronghorns, mule deer, bison, black and grizzly bears, and a host of other wild creatures. Some nearby places are even designated as protected wilderness areas. The federal definition of wilderness, according to the 1964 Wilderness Act, championed by Idaho Senator Frank Church, says, "A wilderness, in contrast to those areas where man and his own works dominate the landscape, is hereby recognized as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain." This is the legal definition used to protect certain areas from development and activities like logging and mining. But it is a definition that is problematic. The presence of any roads or structures, even trails, reveals the undeniable footprint of human beings. So almost no designated wilderness areas are truly untrammeled by man. Wilderness is a tricky word. As Roderick Nash writes in the prologue of his book, Wilderness in the American Mind, the word wilderness has a deceptive concreteness at first glance. The word is a noun that acts like an adjective. There is no specific material object that is wilderness. The term designates a quality, as the ness suggests, that produces a certain mood or feeling in a given individual, and as a consequence may be assigned by that person to a specific place. Because of this subjectivity, a universally accepted definition of wilderness is elusive. One man's wilderness is another's roadside picnic ground. In other words, what constitutes wilderness is truly in the eye of the beholder. But though the concept of wilderness is hard to define, we seem to know it when we experience it. And our experience of wilderness can evoke feelings from awe and wonder to fear and even disgust. When European colonists arrived in North America, they brought with them a largely negative view of wild places, rooted in a combination of the Christian tradition and folklore. Wilderness, and especially the deep forest, was a place where bloodthirsty wolves, wild people, and demonic entities dwelled. Think of all the dark children's stories that take place deep in the forest. Despite a myth that persists for many Americans today, historians and anthropologists now know that the so-called New World that greeted the arrival of Europeans was not one big untrammeled wilderness to the indigenous peoples already living here, though large areas would certainly have qualified as such by anyone's definition. It is estimated that millions of indigenous people were living here at the time of first contact, with many of them living in substantial cities scattered across the continent. There was also extensive agriculture practiced by tribes throughout the Americas, and in some places the forests and rangelands had been managed with annual burning and other techniques. But the sheer vastness and the relatively low population density meant that to European eyes, the New World was an unimaginably large and untamed wilderness peopled by savages, that is, non-Christians, who might just be in league with the devil himself. And by the time the true colonization of America gained momentum in the 1600s, earlier contact with Spanish explorers and coastal fishermen over the previous century had already decimated the populations of many tribes due to European illnesses. The wildness of the land and its native inhabitants seemed even more pronounced. The howling wilderness of the pilgrims' imaginations, together with the real dangers of wilderness travel and the sometimes violent confrontations that arose from cultural clashes with Native Americans, meant that wilderness continued to be regarded negatively by most Americans well into the 19th century. Though a few like to think of pre-contact America as a veritable Garden of Eden, inhabited by noble savages who reflected some kind of idealized, pristine state of humanity. But attitudes were beginning to change. Most people in the 19th century in America still looked at unsettled land as a resource waiting to be cleared and plowed, and felt a moral duty to do so. But beginning with transcendentalists like Emerson and Thoreau, and continuing into a second wave of nature travelers and writers like John Muir, and later 20th century writers like Aldo Leopold, a new appreciation for wilderness emerged. Increasingly, the idea of wilderness took on spiritual and philosophical implications. As Thomas R. Dunlap notes in his book, Faith in Nature, that our book recently discussed, by the way, wilderness seemed a place to explore and possibly heal division, deep in modern society, the alienation of body from mind, observer from object, and humans from the world, and bring about a union of thought and action, emotion and reason. At first glance, ideas like this sound pretty good to those of us who take seriously the idea that we humans are part of an interdependent web of all existence. And this is especially appealing to those of us who are deeply concerned about the conservation of wildlife and wild places for their own sake. I, for one, strongly agree with the thinking of Muir and Thoreau that in wildness is the preservation of the world. And I can, and often do, argue in favor of the spiritual value of nature and time spent in wilderness in particular. But there is a valid criticism we need to acknowledge and explore. And it is in part due to this evolving concept of wilderness into something sacred that exists in a special category from the ordinary world. As Dunlop points out in his book, the historian William Cronin and others have argued that our concept of wilderness as something apart from the human world that must be protected and preserved for us to enjoy effectively segregated us from feeling embedded in nature in a way that encourages us to live in a deeper, more ecological way that lessens our overall impact on the planet and all forms of life. It is too easy, they say, to establish national parks and so-called wilderness areas and rest on our laurels about how we're protecting nature in general. Yes, Yellowstone and Grand Teton are beautiful places and invaluable sanctuaries for the conservation of grizzlies, wolves, and other species. But those places are in part an illusion, a kind of playground for us to enjoy and imagine ourselves as pioneers or mountain men encountering the primordial American landscape before civilization came along and ruined it. And in some places, like Yosemite Valley and parts of the great eastern forests, what we imagine this primordial landscape to have been is actually the result of generations of fire-based management by indigenous people who were living there before Europeans arrived. Even the great John Muir, being as typically racist as anyone else in his day, wrote about his disdain for the Native Americans he encountered in Yosemite. They did not fit into the ideal of the pristine national park untrammeled by man that he envisioned, and his prejudice did not allow him to conceive of their value. Never mind the fact that the Native Americans had lived on the land for thousands of years. Scientists have only recently rediscovered the importance of human-managed fires in the creation and sustainability of many of the so-called wild landscapes we have come to love. And there is renewed interest in rediscovering other kinds of traditional ecological knowledge. But in too many cases, the virtual extermination of tribes and their cultural heritage means that valuable insights we might have learned are lost to history. Native Americans did not imagine wilderness the way we do, of course, but I suspect that contemporary attitudes among Native Americans are pretty much the same as the rest of us. In pre-contact of America, however, the world they inhabited was simply home, though I'm sure they viewed some places as being more wild, ominous, or sacred than others. I am most familiar with the mythology of the southeastern tribes, such as the Cherokee, and they named many places after legendary encounters with mythical creatures that were alleged to have occurred there, as told in stories handed down through generations. There are stories of mountaintops that were the abode of frightening giant wasps, snakes, and other creatures. And some places were simply off limits to humans out of reverence. In the Great Smoky Mountains, for example, the highest peak, formerly known as Clingman's Dome, was just officially renamed with its Cherokee name, Kuwohi, which means mulberry place. They believed it was the place where the animals held their council meetings. The world of Native Americans was filled with sacred places, but they did not see a dichotomy of wilderness versus civilization. In what academics have labeled the Great Wilderness Debate, discussion about the value and conceptualization of wilderness continues, with passionate defenders of wilderness protection arguing that it is not helpful to dismiss the concept of wilderness if we have any hope of preserving the wild places that remain, or wildlife that is under constant threat of premature extinction from the shrinking isolated patches of wilderness that they need. Organizations like the Wilderness Society, the Sierra Club, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative are certainly in this camp, and I personally support all these efforts. Were it not for the work of organizations like these, I imagine many more wild places would look more like Jackson Hole. Critics of the idea of wilderness are right to identify the ambiguous and evolutionary nature of the concept, and I believe they are correct in pointing out the danger of thinking we merely need to preserve a few special places to meet our wild recreational needs, or even as a kind of cage-free zoo. You often hear people speak about the crown jewels of our national park system in reference to the big national parks like Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon. But as spectacular as these may be, there are some protected federal lands that are more ecologically important than they are magnificent places to visit. The Okefenokee Swamp and the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve are a couple of such places that may not be on your short list to explore, but they are protecting a remnant of critical habitat that countless species depend on. I firmly believe that wilderness and wildlife deserve protection and conservation efforts, regardless of philosophical arguments about the reality of wilderness as a concept. There are obvious places on Earth that touch something inside us that recognizes their wild character. And I applaud organizations and individuals working to make this a reality for generations to come. But even if we try to protect wilderness areas by restricting human activity and managing them according to our best ecological science, climate change will continue to have a significant impact that is now largely beyond our control. This is a huge challenge, and it is on full display in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, which devastated parts of the southern Appalachians, due in part to the kind of extreme rainfall events we expect from a warmer atmosphere. There are many miles along the Appalachian Trail, the very symbol of a pilgrim's wilderness journey for many people, where the forest has been flattened and the hillsides have been eroded. Trail crews are still trying to reach some areas to even assess the damage. The trail through these areas no longer has the characteristic feel of a footpath within the deep forest it once had. And it will take at least 100 years for it to return in some areas, assuming no further devastation occurs. If we think an artificial boundary line will spare wilderness from the encroachment of civilization, we are fooling ourselves. I think wilderness is a useful concept and does exist as an alternative to unrestricted human use. And preserving such wild places is important to our souls, but how we relate to wilderness can potentially inhibit our ecological living. If we see ourselves as something apart from nature and wilderness as some kind of rarefied natural preserve, instead of as a home for wildlife that does not privilege human interests, we are ultimately doomed to fail. We may enjoy our playgrounds for a few more generations, but they will become increasingly ecologically impoverished and lose many of the characteristics of why we visit them in the first place. Try to imagine going to Yellowstone without bison or grizzlies. We need to do better. We can do better. Wolves were once driven to extinction in Yellowstone, but now they are back, albeit under constant threat from the non-scientific political policies in the surrounding states. The trophic cascade of reintroducing wolves in Yellowstone has been a clear benefit for all sorts of reasons, and it demonstrates the potential of rewilding places around the globe. The late biologist E.O. Wilson suggested we need to set aside roughly half of the Earth's land and oceans for the preservation of biodiversity, prioritizing the needs of the non-human inhabitants. And I suggest this is the kind of wilderness preservation we need going forward. This is not a matter of setting aside wild places for human recreation or even places to quench our spiritual thirsts. It is simply a way to live our values if we believe we are part of an interdependent web of all existence. So this Thursday, as you enjoy the all-American Thanksgiving holiday that celebrates a spontaneous harvest feast shared by the Pilgrim immigrants and the Wampanoag people they encountered, I urge you to take a few moments and reflect on the unique story of America and the rich natural beauty of our continent. Remember the wild magnificence of Grizzly 399. The America that Europeans encountered was not the howling wilderness of their darkest dread, but neither was it as overdeveloped as much of the old world. The wilderness character of America has always been strong, and if we just plan our human development responsibly and give nature a chance to heal, we can continue to enjoy time in the wilderness to rejuvenate our bodies and nourish our soul's longing the way the transcendentalists and wilderness sages have been urging us to do for centuries. I invite you to rise in body or spirit once again and join in singing our closing hymn, number 15, The Lone Wild Bird.
And all
Our closing words are from the book, The Singing Wilderness by Sigurd Olsen. I once climbed a great ridge called Robinson Peak to watch the sunset and to get a view of the lakes and rivers below, the rugged hills and valleys of the Quetico Superior Wilderness in northern Minnesota. When I reached the bald knob of the peak, the sun was just above the horizon, a flaming ball ready to drop into the dusk below. Far beneath me on a point of pines reaching into the lake was the white inverted V of my tent. It looked very tiny down there where it was almost night. As I watched and listened, I became conscious of the slow, steady hum of millions of insects, and through it, the calling of the whitethroats and the violin notes of the hermit thrushes. But it all seemed very vague from that height and very far away. And gradually they merged one with another, blending in a great enveloping softness of sound, no louder, it seemed, than my breathing. The sun was trembling now on the edge of the ridge. It was alive, almost fluid and pulsating. And as I watched it sink, I thought that I could feel the earth turning from it, actually feel its rotation. Overall was the silence of wilderness, that sense of oneness which comes only when there are no distracting sights or sounds, when we listen with inward ears and see with inward eyes, and when we feel and are aware with our entire beings rather than our senses. I thought as I sat there of the ancient admonition, be still and know that I am God. And knew that without stillness there can be no knowing. Without divorcement from outside influences, humankind cannot know what spirit means.
Please join me in reading the words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the power of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.